Transparency, the subtlety and texture, the feeling of light and movement. There's a sense of balance and calm. I think that's just a satisfying feeling that I'm chasing. I spend a lot of time with coloring books, coloring within the lines, which kind of makes sense now based on the kind of work I'm doing. I still love losing myself in a process that's sort of meditative and repetitive. There's something very satisfying about coming up with this perfectly symmetrical composition and then putting it onto canvas and kind of messing with it in terms of shape and color. The structure frees me and allows me to be able to paint in a more intuitive way. But somewhere along the lines, maybe in high school, I decided that I didn't want to be a painter and I didn't want to sit in a studio all day, and I wanted to do something that applied art as opposed to being a fine artist. So I started off on this path where, I studied art history as a basis, not knowing what I was going to do with it, and then tried all these other professions that used my knowledge of art history and some technical skills I picked up along the way, but they didn't quite feel satisfying enough. I was always searching for my own sort of visual language that I wasn't able to use in those industries. They didn't feel creative enough. And I feel like in the end, painting kind of found me. And I am now kind of consciously making the decision every day to try and make a living from my own work, which is terrifying, but I wouldn't have it any other way now. Dealing with that mix of kind of scary paralysis and that energy and time to make things is a really, it's a tough thing that I feel like I still deal with now during slow periods. When there aren't many opportunities coming along or paid jobs lined up, you have that fear that nothing's going to come along mixed with the knowledge that you have to, that's the time that you have to use to make the work that you really do want to make. I like starting with a ton of sketches and a ton of chaos and putting all the ideas down because I want to have all that I can to put into this simple thing. These pieces, the blue ones, I started those last winter, and I was thinking a lot about kind of rhythm and routine and the cadence of days, every day melding into the next, how we kind of hibernate and turn inwards more in the winter in Maine, and how I really crave that when the winter comes around. Summer here is so drastically different. And I think that's a really unique thing to Maine. When you spend enough time alone, you spend enough time looking at all these things you've created. It's easy and very common to kind of change your mind quickly about whether it's good or not good, depending on the time of day and how long it's been up on the wall. I don't think you always have to like what you make. My partner, Brian, I'll force him to come up and just look at things, and he'll often be drawn to the thing that I thought was the least successful. So yeah, it's all in the mind's eye. I think there's a balance between knowing when to step away and when to push through. some are really easy, and I sort of finish what I set out to do, and I put it on the wall, and I kind of walk past it a few times, and it just feels right. And I know that if I try and like touch it a little bit more, it'll be thrown off. And then others I really struggle with, and they just won't feel right, and I will keep kind of layering and working at them, and they're like a battle. I made a body of paintings that I showed in Vermont in May. It was interesting what people were drawn to, because I felt like there were some that I had spent barely any time on that just worked, and people really responded to those. And then there were some that I had a really hard time with and just never really made it to that level of success in my mind. And I don't know if people can see when you've spent a lot of time on something, or when something came really effortlessly and just works, but I could pour a lot of myself into something really small and then make a bigger piece in a short amount of time, but the value is drastically different and maybe doesn't reflect the amount of hours that's gone into something. But I try not to dwell on that too much, because then I don't know if that's not what it's about. But in order to try and make a living from the work, that you have to put a number on it. You could have two paintings alongside each other that are worth the same, and you put months into one and a day into the other. It's just an interesting thing to think about, and I feel like that kind of translates into, knowing when something's done or not. It's just, it's kind of a feeling. Place is definitely central to the work I make. During the pandemic, I kind of turned away from place-based work, and because we weren't traveling and the world was scary and I was super anxious, and I made a lot of work that was very much based on shape and color. I was just trying to simplify and create balance and calm, like an anxiety antidote. So those are the exception. But before the pandemic, I was making a lot of work based on the built environment. I was looking at a lot of architecture. I was looking at the city around me. And then I think it's been interesting since moving to Maine. We're in a timber frame house with these big passive solar windows that just look out onto woods. And that's such a different view that to what I had in Philly. I've fallen in love with the Maine art community. I was in Philadelphia for 10 years before, and that's where I did my kind of transition from working as a designer for a corporation to trying to be an artist. And I found it, I love Philadelphia and I love my friends and the art community there. It felt like there was almost this like scarcity mentality of opportunity there, even though it was a bigger city. But as soon as I came to Maine, I feel like in the first 2 years, I made more artist friends and felt more welcome than I did in that like kind of 10 years in Philly. I think people are just so open and supportive and generous with their time and generous with opportunities. You'll meet someone at an opening here and you won't have that superficial small chat and never hear from them. They'll follow through and will email you or have that studio visit. And that feels really unique to Maine in my experience. It feels kind of like a miracle that I'm able to support myself making things. So I'm just gonna keep trying to do that, and that's good for me. I feel like the thing I'm continually trying to practice myself is to, and I touched on it earlier, but is to harness those moments where, the scary moments where things are really slow and you may not have many opportunities coming along, or paid work, but to not panic and freak out during those moments, and to really spend them making new, exciting work that has maybe been kind of sitting for a little while and you've been afraid to touch it because you've had other more pressing things to do or deadlines to meet. So yeah, not panicking and kind of moving forward with new work.